In the third year of being a simp for my boyfriend, I decided to stop. I deleted his number on my iPhone, moved out of the apartment we shared, and broke up with him using a flimsy excuse. Our couple necklaces fell into the artificial lake. The fortune teller said it's a bad omen. I never expected to see him again, and I didn't think he'd buy my ridiculous breakup reason. Later, I heard from others that the top-ranked hunk in the physics department of Stanford University went crazy. He jumped into the lake just to find the vanished necklace. After class, I shut down my iPad. I opened my phone, closed my eyes, and said a 3-second prayer. When I opened my eyes, sure enough, Ethan still hadn't replied to my messages. Ethan, I'm going out first. Don't forget your keys. Ethan, when will your class end? Ethan, there's a new, really good bakery near the school. Wanna go there after class? In our chat thread on WhatsApp, all the messages were from me. I always told myself he was just too busy to check his phone. But in today's psychology class, the professor said that if someone is truly important to you, you'd even jump out of the shower to reply to their message. I waited for Ethan at the entrance of the physics department. One time, I went to his classroom to find him, and he got mad. So I learned my lesson and decided to wait at the department entrance instead. As the sun was setting, I finally spotted him. He was tall and lanky, standing out in the crowd. He had a backpack slung over one shoulder, and there was a girl beside him, showing him some papers and doing some calculations. There were always girls around Ethan. Ethan, I ran up to them. I clasped my hands behind my back and gave the girl a friendly smile. She looked a bit flustered and hid behind Ethan. Ethan's eyes landed on me. After a moment, he said casually, "What?" At that moment, I had a million questions in my mind. Why didn't you reply to my messages? Why are you so close to other girls? Why did you forget our plan again? But what came out of my mouth was, "It's getting dark. Ethan, aren't you cold?" The evening breeze was a bit chilly. I stared at his somewhat indifferent face. I couldn't help but remember what my friends said when they found out I was being a simp. Come on, you're not bad looking or anything. Why are you so hung up on one guy? But when they learned it was Ethan, they understood. Hey, it's Ethan we're talking about. If you don't go after him, there are plenty of other girls who will. When we're young, we all meet someone who leaves an indelible mark on our hearts. Ethan was that guy for me. During the sophomore year's sports meet, he suddenly leaned next to me. Sweat trickled down his Adam's apple, and his eyes and eyebrows were the most handsome I'd ever seen. He stared right into my eyes, tilted his head a bit, and looked so cool. Hey, could I buy a bottle of water from you? Back then, Ethan never could have imagined that he'd end up with such a clingy girl like me. In the end, Ethan accompanied me to the bakery I'd mentioned in the morning. I didn't expect the newly opened bakery to be so crowded. Ethan hates crowded places. So when I saw the long line outside, I grabbed his hand and said, "Forget it, there are too many people." But he stopped and said, "I'll wait for you." Sometimes, he'd be in a good mood and show a bit more patience than usual. I queued up inside the bakery and looked out the window. The guy in black, still with his backpack on one shoulder, was looking down at his phone. Just standing there, he caught the attention of many girls. But when I finally got my cake and came out, he was gone. I texted him on WhatsApp and called him, but he didn't reply or answer. I didn't even feel surprised. I was used to his coldness and rejections. The last time he responded to me was when I confessed my love to him for the 21st time. My teacher always said I was a stubborn girl. My mom said the same thing. This stubbornness was most obvious when it came to my pursuit of Ethan. He got early admission to Stanford in our sophomore year. At that time, my grades were mediocre at best, nowhere near good enough for Stanford. The first time I cornered him in the boys' restroom to confess, he coldly said, "I don't like girls with bad grades." Because of that, I went from being the 361st ranked student in the grade to the 57th. Later, I managed to get into Stanford through a transfer. When I saw him at the school gate, it was the 16th time I confessed. That time, he just frowned and said, "I don't like you. I think that even though we've been dating for 2 years, Ethan probably doesn't love me that much." I carried the cake home alone. I didn't turn on the lights and just sat on the floor in the entryway, covering my eyes with my hands. After a while, I felt my hands getting wet. Don't be sad just because he blew you off. Hasn't this happened so many times? Don't be heartbroken. If you cry every time, life will be so miserable. I kept telling myself these things until my phone rang. But when I saw it was Ethan calling, my heart skipped a beat. When I answered, it wasn't his voice on the other end. "Hi, are you the senior?" "Well, I saw Ethan at the bakery. There's a department dinner tonight, so I invited him. He seems drunk. Can you come and pick him up?" It was the girl who was with Ethan earlier. I agreed, stood up, and grabbed his thick jacket. I scolded myself. If I kept acting like this, I'd be the pathetic joker. Ethan was really drunk. When I dragged him into the apartment, he still held onto my hand. We're home, Ethan. I tried to take off his scarf. His face was red, and so were his ears. His eyes were a bit misty, and he stared at me. After a moment, he leaned in and kissed me. But he lost his balance, and we both fell to the floor. In the somewhat messy entryway, he propped himself up on his hands and planted soft kisses along my ear, with a hint of grape-flavored wine on his breath. Ethan, do you remember what you promised me yesterday? I pushed him away and straightened his collar. He frowned. Chances were he didn't remember. It didn't matter if he forgot. Even if I blamed him, he wouldn't care. So I got up unsteadily, took out the cake, and showed it to him. You promised to spend my birthday with me tonight, but you went to the dinner with that girl. Why can't you just care about me a little? I swallowed those words back. He looked down at the cake, then picked it up, unwrapped it, and put it on the table. Let's celebrate now. It's not the same. How's it different? It's past midnight. So what? He stared at me, annoyance written all over his face. Nothing. I sighed, walked over, cut the cake, and gave him a slice. The sweet cream melted in my mouth. I didn't dare tell him how much I'd been looking forward to this birthday. I thought he'd spend the whole night with me. But even if I told him, he wouldn't understand. I raised my slice of cake and clinked it with his. Ethan, do you think I'll always love you? He didn't answer. I don't know the answer either, at least not yet. Ethan is like a honey jar, always tempting me. I'm a bit bitter. I hope that one day, he'll look at me with love in his eyes. Or maybe one day, when I don't crave his love anymore, I'll pack my things and leave. By then, no matter how much he calls me back, I won't turn around. When I woke up, there was a necklace beside me. It was in the shape of a heart, and there should be a matching one. It took me a while to realize it was probably a birthday present. So, does Ethan really care about me? Most likely not. If I left him, he probably wouldn't be sad. He might even feel relieved. Many times, I'm glad I'm a psychology major. Otherwise, Ethan would drive me crazy with all this emotional turmoil. Thanks to my major, I could still act normal and sit next to him in the public elective class the next day. You left so early. Did you have breakfast? I propped my head on my hand and looked at him as if nothing had happened. Yes, he answered in a monotone. The morning sunlight shone on his face, and I got lost in thought. I felt stupid for being so crazy about him just because of his good looks. I was a bit surprised. Ethan doesn't like breakfast, so he has a weak stomach. Over the years, I've been the one forcing him to eat breakfast. Senior, I brought breakfast for Ethan. Suddenly, a girl popped up from the other side of Ethan. I raised my eyebrows. It was the girl from yesterday. Her tone was cheerful, but there was a hint of smugness in her voice, as if she was trying to show that she was special to Ethan. But I knew Ethan wouldn't have a real relationship with her. Based on what I know about him, if he really fell for someone, he'd break up with me right away. In Ethan's world, there are only those never-ending physics problems. The reason we're together is also related to physics. It was the 21st time I confessed my love to him. I'd been pestering him from time to time, not expecting a response. I love you. Then that afternoon, I remember clearly, there were 4 minutes and 27 seconds left before class ended. He replied, I love you too. God, those 5 words hit me like a ton of bricks. I immediately thought of all the possible explanations. Maybe he lost a truth, or dare game, or his account was hacked, or he just typed the wrong thing. He might have meant to say, I don't love you. 5 minutes later, he sent another message. Do you want to be my girlfriend? I felt like I'd exploded with happiness. Later, I found out that a girl in the department threatened to jump off the building because of him. His advisor talked to him. He was annoyed, so he used me as an excuse. He told them he had a girlfriend. This public class is an elective, and students from different grades can take it. Everyone is mixed up in the class. After class, the professor assigned a group project. 2 students should work together to complete a research. I naturally thought that I would be in a group with Ethan. After all, I was his girlfriend. However, his junior female classmate directly reported her name and Ethan's together. Senior, here's the thing. Ethan and I are in the same major, and we just have a task assigned by our tutor. This research topic is also very relevant, and it will be more convenient for us to work on it together. Why don't you find someone else to team up with? This time, I could really hear the pride in her tone. I looked at Ethan again, and he didn't show much reaction. He just stared at me, his thin lips pursed slightly, obviously agreeing with what his junior classmate said. I was at a loss for words. This elective course was for physics majors. I chose it only because Ethan was taking it. Most of the students in the class were science majors, and as a student from the School of Liberal Arts, I barely knew anyone there. As I watched everyone report their group members, I gradually became the odd one out. Subconsciously, I looked at him with a pleading gaze, but I forgot one thing. How could he possibly stand up for me? Maybe he was just annoyed with me and deliberately chose to be in a group with his junior classmate. My nose stung a bit, and I lay down on the desk. I secretly scolded myself for being so useless. It was such a trivial matter, yet it still messed with my emotions. Look at yourself, thinking you're someone important again. Senior, what's wrong? Don't you have anyone to team up with? Just at this moment, that junior classmate added fuel to the fire. I clenched my fist, ready to retort when I couldn't bear it any longer. Then a clear voice came from above my head. Yes, she does. Someone ruffled my hair. Edna, what a coincidence. You're also taking this elective course in astrophysics? It was indeed a coincidence. It was my classmate, Alex. He was the captain of the school basketball team. I thought someone with such well-developed athletic skills wouldn't choose a sedentary elective course. It seemed I was saved. I took the list and wanted to write down Alex's name, but I couldn't find a pen. So I said to the person next to me, lend me a pen. Then, I saw my boyfriend, who had been silent all this time, now looking intently at the hand that the guy was using to ruffle my hair. After a while, he still didn't react. He handed me the pen in his hand. I actually thought for a moment that he was jealous. It was almost time for class to end after the groups were divided. The guy behind me tapped my back and asked if I wanted to go for a meal together. I was going to go with Ethan. I originally wanted to say that I was going to have lunch with Ethan, but then I saw the person beside me pick up his things and walk out. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, his tall figure leaving without even looking back. It seemed that he had no intention of having lunch with me. Judging by the way you two are you going to have a Cold War? Alex barely lifted his head from his lunch in the bustling cafeteria. In fact, Ethan and I rarely had Cold Wars because it was almost impossible for me to ignore him unilaterally. I knew that if I ignored him, he might never talk to me again. I was thick-skinned and had a good attitude, and I could always adjust myself. It's okay. I'll go find him in the afternoon. I waved my spoon and changed the subject by the way. Are you interested in astrophysics? So you chose this course? I chose it because of you. The words from the person in front of me almost made me choke on the tomato and egg soup I had just swallowed. He put down his chopsticks and asked me seriously, Edna, do you really have no intention of going to the UK for research with Professor William? He values you so much among all the students in the class. This is a great opportunity for getting a guaranteed postgraduate admission. The teacher who taught us criminal psychology had always thought highly of me. He had invited me to study with him in the UK more than once. On the one hand, he was truly a top scholar in this field. If I became his student, my future would be well secured. On the other hand, I had never been abroad before, and once I agreed, it would mean that I would have to travel across the ocean. It also meant that the chances of me seeing Ethan would be very, very few. I really felt like a fool for thinking that not being able to see Ethan was a difficult hurdle for me to overcome, and that's why I had been hesitant. If my love-sick mentality were to be posted online, I would be scolded 800 times. And considering that I was a psychology major, I should be scolded an extra 200 times. Alex, I'm really not rational. I stirred the greens on my plate with a bit of discouragement. I'm studying psychology, but my love life is still a mess. The guy in front of me let out a long sigh. It's nothing. A few years ago, a teacher in our department even got depression because of a student's behavior. I went to Ethan's laboratory to find him. In the afternoon, I sent him a message. I didn't believe that he couldn't understand that the collapse of the Soviet Union and the drastic changes in Eastern Europe in 1991 meant the end of the Cold War, but he only replied with a question mark. Just a question mark. I stared at that question mark hundreds of times, hoping that he would say something more to me, but there was nothing. When I pushed open the door of the laboratory, I saw that Ethan's junior classmate was still standing beside him. Her name was Anna, right? This time, I remembered her name. Seeing me come in, Anna frowned and blocked my way. What are you doing here? People who are not related to the experiment are not allowed in the laboratory. Of course, I wasn't going to give way. I'm here to find my boyfriend, Ethan. Actually, I didn't expect him to give me any response. He usually ignored me the most when I called his name. But this time, the man walked over while taking off his experimental gloves and stood beside me, staring at me. Let's go. This time, not only was I stunned, but even Anna beside us widened her eyes. Senior, what about the experiment? It's time to get off work. If you want to work overtime, you can do it by yourself. Perhaps because of his overly comfortable upbringing, Ethan was like this to everyone. Plain, indifferent, and never gentle. I followed him out of the laboratory, and I felt that my traitorous heart still fluttered a bit. In fact, there were very few times when Ethan and I could spend the whole night together. He was busy with his experiments. Just this semester, he had published 2 science citation index papers with him as the first author. Sometimes he would come back for the dinner I cooked, and sometimes he wouldn't. But he had never accompanied me to buy groceries like today. I actually knew what he liked to eat. When I was picking potatoes, I saw the man standing in front of the freezer, leaning against the shopping cart and looking at me. He had a very striking kind of handsomeness. You could remember him at the first sight and never forget him once you got a taste of his charm. The white light fell behind him, and he just looked at me quietly. I didn't know what he was thinking. When we got home, I knew what he was thinking. The lights in the room were off. I was about to put down the groceries and turn on the lights, but then I was held by the back of my neck and kissed by the man. Then, in the hallway again, we fell to the floor of the hallway once more. Sometimes I really should tidy up the shoes in the hallway, but fortunately, he still raised his hand to protect my head. Doing such things was like a pastime between lovers, and it was the same for me and him. As for expressing love to each other, my love was probably much more intense than his. He usually responded to me very little, but he was more responsive when we were doing this kind of thing. The moonlight fell on his eyebrows and eyes for no reason. I realized that he was looking down at me, but I couldn't see the emotion in his eyes, nor did I understand what I looked like in his eyes. I just thought that as long as I held onto him, he would be mine. As for the bitterness and embarrassment in it, I deserved it. I would deal with it myself. I would turn back when I hit the wall. One day, when I really couldn't take it anymore, I would leave. I didn't have the energy to cook dinner after that, so Ethan cooked it in the end. I rarely ate the food he cooked. In fact, it tasted quite good. You can cook from now on. I nodded in approval. The man, who was refreshed after taking a shower, had already returned to his usual indifferent self. He just gave a soft hum, pursed his thin lips, and seemed half ignoring me. On this day, I was specifically called to the tutor's office. Professor Lin, the youngest professor of criminal psychology at Stanford University, had countless students who wanted to study under him. I guess no one would think that there was a fool who would give up the opportunity to go abroad for research with him, and I was that fool. Edna, you can put forward any requirements you have to me, and I will try my best to solve them within my ability. All your grade evaluations are A+, and you should know that I value you very much. My research group is about to leave for the UK soon. The formalities can be reissued. This is your last chance. The man in a smoke blue shirt leaned against the desk. After a while, he frowned and said, I heard from Alex that you don't want to go abroad because of relationship issues? Alex really told everything. But obviously, this expert who studied how murderers dismembered bodies was not very good at studying why young couples quarreled. Just as I was about to explain, someone stumbled into the office. I've told you many times not to be so reckless. Professor Lin frowned and looked at Alex, who was out of breath. Teacher, Edna, look at this post. It's already gone viral and has spread on a small scale in the school. There was a social networking site called the Confession Wall in the school. Although it was called the Confession Wall, if there were any disputes or quarrels between students, they would also post on it. In short, it was a place for people to gossip. But I never thought that one day I would see my own name on it. My fountain pen was lost in the laboratory of the teaching building yesterday afternoon. That fountain pen was given to my grandfather by a famous physicist, and then my grandfather left it to me. It's not only very expensive but also very important to me. The surveillance camera in the teaching building is damaged, but by checking the access control of the laboratory, it was found that besides me and my senior, only a girl from another faculty came to the laboratory during the time when the pen was lost. So, I hope Edna, a student majoring in psychology from the School of Sociology, class of 2020, can return my fountain pen to me as soon as possible. There was even a copy of my admission photo attached to the post. The confession wall was browsed by thousands of students every day. This kind of gossip that named the person directly had already spread among all grades. Ah, I know Edna. She's from our faculty. Really? What kind of person is she? She has strong professional abilities. She seems quite cheerful usually, but I didn't expect her to be like this. Yeah, why would a top student do something like stealing? Damn, you don't know. She's just the kind of person who has no shame. I heard that when she got together with the heartthrob from the physics department, she just pestered him relentlessly. Well, we can't just listen to one side of the story, right? It's not very nice to gossip about others behind their backs, is it? Blame others for gossiping? If she didn't do this kind of thing, there wouldn't be such rumors. Indeed, for a moment, I was so angry that I felt the blood rushing to my head. That so-called fountain pen, I had never even seen it. The person who posted the message didn't use an anonymous account. It was Anna, Ethan's junior classmate. I didn't know if she really thought I stole her thing or if she just wanted to smear me. The next second, the phone call from the counselor came through. Edna, come to my office now. I took a deep breath and inhaled slowly. Okay, counselor. Before that, I have one more thing to do. I hung up the phone, raised my hand, and dialed the police hotline. Anna, regarding the theft of your fountain pen, I've already reported it to the police. The police officer here will help you look for it. Now, I hope we can discuss the matter of you posting my personal information and portrait on the social platform without my permission. If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, then I'll have to ask the police officer to take you away as well. In the counselor's office, the atmosphere was extremely tense. Anna stared at me with red eyes. How can you be so brazen after stealing someone else's thing? You're just counting on the fact that I don't have conclusive evidence, right? I kept telling myself not to get angry. Being impulsive at this moment would put me at a disadvantage. However, when I saw the guy standing beside her, my heart still jolted violently. Ethan is really something. He always has the ability to break down my defenses. I went to check the records with my senior. During that time period, you were the only visitor. If you didn't take it, who else could have? I didn't hear clearly what she said after that. I only remembered that sentence. I went to check the records with my senior, so he had been accompanying her all this time. Did he also think that I had taken that fountain pen? I stared at Ethan standing behind the crowd. He was always like this, acting as if nothing had to do with him, as if no one could pull him down from his high pedestal. He always looked at everything with a superior gaze. It was the same for me. This matter was handed over to the police for investigation, and the post on the confession wall was also withdrawn. On the way back, Ethan walked in front of me with his hands in his pockets. I couldn't help it and caught up with him. What exactly do you think? The man stopped in his tracks and frowned at me. What do I think about what? Do you also think that I took her pen? He looked down at me. After a moment, he turned around and continued walking. It has nothing to do with me. The task assigned by the tutor is almost impossible to finish, and she has been absent-minded. I just wanted her to finish the work at hand as soon as possible. I quickened my steps and grabbed his sleeve. My voice trembled involuntarily. Can't you stand by my side just once and believe me? Just once, Ethan? It was another plea. I always pleaded with him, hoping to get his affirmative reply. I was always stubbornly convinced that this time, I could move him, even just a little bit. But it never happened. If you're innocent, you don't have to be afraid of being wrongly accused. Why do you always ask me to believe you? Is my belief really that important? He frowned again. This was a precursor to his impatience. I bit my lip and felt the tears welling up in my eyes. I'm so useless, so incredibly useless, Edna. I dropped my hand. It's very important. I said this, but I didn't know if he, who had already walked away, heard me. The ending of this matter was quite dramatic. In the end, the police found the fountain pen in the crack of a table in the laboratory. I thought that my innocence had finally been proven, and at least I could get an apology from her. But after being taken back to the police station for criticism and education, when the girl saw me again, she rolled her eyes at me. Who knows if you climbed in through the window at night and secretly put the pen back, just because of this sentence. As soon as the police left, I got into a fight with her. We both ended up in the school infirmary. Although impulsiveness is the devil, I'm not a saint either. Alex said that I was too inexperienced. I should have recorded the conversation and then sued her for picking a fight. Now that we had a fight, it wasn't her sole responsibility anymore. But at least I pulled out 3 tufts of hair from her forehead, and although I scratched my face too, at least she was grimacing in pain. Later, Ethan came to pick me up from the school infirmary. I don't know why, but when I saw him, the tears welled up in my eyes. I just like him. I just go soft when I see him. What can I do? I threw myself into his arms and cried. He froze for a moment and then asked me, "Why are you crying?" He was quite cold. He didn't understand, and I was used to it. I wiped my tears on his white shirt and said to him, "Let's go." He looked at me. "I'm not here for you." Ah? There were still tears on my cheeks. Then I saw him stand up and walk over to the girl who was sitting 10 seats away from me, the girl who had scratched my face. "Come with me when you've rested. There's still an experiment that hasn't been completed. The tutor said it's the deadline." I didn't look at the girl's expression. I thought that maybe there would be a hint of provocation or showing off. I just felt a dull pain in my chest, as if I had been stung, and my wound hurt too. I pressed on it and told myself that after a while, it wouldn't hurt anymore. Ethan probably got home at around 9 o'clock in the evening. "Did you finish the experiment before the deadline?" I was sitting on the sofa and looked up at him. He gave a soft hum in the hallway as he changed his shoes, walked in, and stopped when he passed by me. Did you two have a fight today? Does your wound still hurt? It was a very indifferent question. I shook my head and continued. Are you hungry? Do you want me to cook you some supper? He said no and walked straight into the bedroom. I nodded. It seemed like this was really an ordinary night. I lowered my eyes and looked at the last message the teacher sent me on my phone. Edna, I'm glad you finally decided to go to the UK for further study with us. The time is quite tight, and the plane tickets have already been booked. Pack your luggage tonight and you'll have to leave tomorrow morning. In our sophomore year, Ethan and I watched a movie called The Legend of 1900. At that time, I didn't understand a description in it. It said that a painting hanging on the wall suddenly fell with a bang one day, falling without any warning. The pianist who had always lived on the ship also wanted to get off the ship one day without any warning. I was wondering how it was possible for people to decide on some things without any warning. Until 6 o'clock in the morning that day, I packed my luggage, put the keys at the door, and left Ethan without any warning. When I passed by the artificial lake on campus, I took off the couple necklace he gave me that day and threw it into the lake. Then I sent him a text message saying, our couple necklace fell into the artificial lake. The fortune teller, someone who is able to predict the future, said it's not a good omen. So, Ethan, let's break up. The winter in Germany is really cold. I stood outside the window and watched the snow disappear into the pine trees. Alex stood beside me and handed me a cup of coffee. How's it going? I asked him. It's not easy. This is an international academic seminar, and all the scientists here are well-known figures. How could such a murder case happen? The way of killing is so perverted. Otherwise, they wouldn't have invited us. This was the 5th year since I left Stanford University with Professor Lin. Following a top expert, I could indeed learn a lot of good things, but the cases I dealt with were also extremely difficult. I used to rush out and vomit into the trash can when I first entered a murder scene, but now I can calmly squat beside a corpse and share a bun with Alex. In handling cases, criminal psychology plays a crucial role in analyzing the criminal's profile, studying the criminal's psychology, and judging the possibility of the criminal committing the crime again. So many international major cases would invite professors from top universities to assist in the investigation. This time, we were involved in a murder case that occurred at an international academic exchange meeting. The case was very difficult. The suspect was extremely cruel and directly cut off the victim's head and placed it on the dinner plate. There was a possibility of a vendetta killing and the suspect might commit the crime again. All the people present were suspects, so the police carried out a protective blockade of the scene. You two, stop chatting outside. Edna, you're good at foreign languages. Go and ask those scientists at the crime scene again. Alex, come with me. The door was pushed open again, and there were even a few traces of annoyance on Professor Lin's usually calm face. It seemed that this case was really difficult. Sure thing, bro. I'm coming. Alex got up eagerly and followed the man. I took a few more sips of coffee outside and watched the two of them walking one after the other. Alex didn't even try to hide the fact that he called Professor Lin brother in front of me. They seemed to be stepbrothers. As for whether there were any other relationships, I was thinking. I tapped my forehead with a pen. I learned German recently and could only do some simple daily communication. When I asked someone who couldn't speak English at all and could only communicate in German, I had to piece together the meaning. Sei sagten, sei assen and jenem nachmittag Süßkartoffeln? Did you say you were eating chocolate potatoes that afternoon? I frowned and looked at the slightly listless middle-aged German man in front of me. He said that when he saw the human head on his plate, he vomited all night. Suddenly, a calm voice came from beside me. The probability of hearing my mother tongue in a foreign country was really small. But what made me stop in my tracks wasn't just the familiarity of the mother tongue. It was also the voice. I must have been cursed today. I met someone whose voice was extremely similar to my ex-boyfriend's. I raised my head, and the next second I met his gaze. I was completely stunned. I never thought I would meet Ethan again. Come on, I had crossed the Atlantic Ocean. The earth was so big that I should never have met him even if I ran for a lifetime. But now he was standing in front of me. He was wearing a white shirt. His figure was tall and slender, and his face was still incredibly handsome. His expression remained as cold as ever. My gaze fell on the name tag hanging on his chest. Oh, he was also an invited scientist. I didn't know why I turned around and ran the next second. I made it seem like I was the real fugitive. But I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to see him anymore since the moment I left 5 years ago. Couldn't he just leave me alone? But obviously, the man who had been calling my name and following me since we met again didn't want to let me go. In the end, he cornered me in the narrow space of the pantry. My hand rubbed against the iron railing due to the violent movement. It turned red. I hissed in pain, and he immediately grabbed my hand. Are you okay? I slapped his hand away. It's been 5 years since I last saw him. He didn't seem to have changed much, except that his eyes turned red when I shook off his hand. All these years, I've been looking for you, I heard him say. The mist from the coffee cup dispersed. We sat on both sides of the stairs, and it seemed that there was still room for one more person in between. I asked the teachers and classmates, and even went to the UK, but I couldn't find you anywhere. What do you want from me? I interrupted him. He turned to look at me, his eyes earnest and stubborn, as if he was trying to solve a physics problem that he couldn't crack for a long time. Why did you break up with me? Actually, I had thought this question through clearly 5 years ago. People's hearts are made of flesh, and feelings are complex and intertwined. It would be a lie to say that I didn't miss him when I left him. On the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, there was even once when I took out my phone and almost removed him from my blacklist. But time is an even more cruel thing. It will gradually erase the deep memories of the past. In the past 5 years, I have been busy, running around, and I have almost forgotten the reason why I refused to let go in the first place. When I look back on it now, it's like watching a fire from the other side of the river. So I rubbed the rim of the cup and could only think of that answer. That day, I just felt completely exhausted. I stood up and was about to leave when he grabbed my wrist from behind. Edna, I turned back to look at him. Can we not end this? No, even I didn't expect that I would answer so quickly. The wife murder case in Los Angeles on January 23rd. The wife murder for insurance fraud case in Chicago on September 24th. The marital rape and wife murder case in New York on April 6th. Ethan, over the years, I have dealt with so many wife murder cases. My heart is colder than if I had been killing fish in the market for 10 years. Ethan just didn't seem to understand what I was saying. He still followed me. You're not used to this pickled cabbage water drink, he reminded me when he saw me pick up a green packaged drink. But I've always been rebellious, and I'm even more so when it comes to Ethan's words. I opened the lid and took a sip, then turned around to look for a place to spit it out. He laughed beside me, his eyes curving into crescents. He was laughing. In the 3 years I was with him, I rarely saw him laugh. I couldn't get rid of him, so I just let him follow. When he followed me, he would consciously help me translate German. He knew very well how to convey information and was familiar with many of the researchers present. I hadn't heard much about him in these years, but it was obvious that he was a well-known figure in the field of physics. After walking around like this, I actually managed to sort out some of the confusing information before and after the crime. It was already midnight local time, and the suspect still hadn't been found. This presented 2 problems. First, with so many top academic experts gathered here, the cost was high. Now that a murder case had occurred, should the conference continue? Second, was there a possibility that the suspect would commit another crime? According to Professor Lin's speculation, there was. The criminal's behavior was clearly a vendetta killing. After the murder, the criminal used the victim's blood to write in German, "None of you can escape." Who were the people who couldn't escape, and how would the murderer carry out the next crime? We spent the whole night sorting out the victim's relationship network. Staying up all night like this was nothing new, but because I hadn't adjusted to the time difference, I really couldn't hold on. So I rubbed my eyes and leaned back on the chair, wanting to rest for a while. When I opened my eyes again, I found that I was lying on someone's lap. The linen shirt felt quite comfortable against my face, and there was a faint smell of oranges, cold yet a bit sweet, which was very similar to the scent of the shower gel someone used to use. As I thought this, I suddenly sat up. Ethan, I called his name coldly. But he pushed up the black-rimmed glasses that I didn't know when he had put on, and pointed to the notebook that he had taken away from me without my knowing with a pen. There are a few grammar problems here. I think the original meaning should be like this. The places he had circled and revised did make the meaning much smoother. It was very strange. The 2 of us who left things so hastily 5 years ago could actually chat so calmly 5 years later. But 5 years ago, I wouldn't have dared to hope that you would organize my notes for me, Ethan. I stood up, wanting to go outside to get some fresh air and clear my head. He also stood up and followed me. Suddenly, a black coat was draped over my shoulders. The temperature difference between indoors and outdoors is large. It's cold outside. Don't catch a cold. I sighed, rubbed my face, and turned back to look at him. Do you want to chat for a while, Ethan? The snow had stopped, but it seemed even colder outside. I stared at his thin shirt, but I no longer had the feeling of being for him and worrying that he would catch a cold. Whether he freezes to death in the snow has nothing to do with me. The Zeigarnik effect. People often can't forget things that are interrupted or unfulfilled. It's the same with you after I broke up with you, Ethan. You're just unwilling. You're unwilling that this relationship ended abruptly because I proposed it, and you're not used to the sudden interruption of a relationship. But this is a very normal psychological phenomenon, and I'm explaining it to you clearly now. This is not because you love me or like me. It's your feeling of unwillingness that's at work. It's like a nanny who takes care of you everywhere has left, and you feel uncomfortable with it. That's all. But you don't have to be unwilling. So many years have passed, and there are plenty of people more suitable for you than me, and there have always been many people who like you. So do you understand now? Our relationship has ended. Completely ended. Don't look for me anymore. Don't follow me anymore, okay? No. Suddenly, I was pulled into his arms. He was indeed quite cold. The melted snow seeped into his sleeves. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel him trembling. No, it's not like that. I didn't stop liking you. I didn't stop loving you. I've thought about it over and over again these years. I'm not just unwilling. I'm just... He paused. After a long while, his voice was drowned out by the wind and snow, but at that moment, I could clearly hear his breath, hesitant and choking, as if he had prepared for a long time, yet also as if he had been suddenly attacked. I'm sorry. I pushed him, but I couldn't push him away. Okay, you've apologized. Ethan, if you keep holding me, I'll call the police. I used to think that I was the one who had no shame, but I never expected that one day I would think that Ethan had no shame. In the breakfast restaurant, I looked up at the man opposite me. Can't you understand what I'm saying? He coughed a few times, half of his face hidden in his windbreaker. There were dark circles under his eyes, and it was obvious that he wasn't used to staying up late. I can be your translator. It was an objectively fair and tempting reason. Thanks to his help yesterday, I did work more efficiently, and I couldn't find any drawbacks. I took him and questioned the people who attended the conference again. In fact, these people had already been interrogated by the police countless times, but because I was with Ethan, they were more patient with me. He kept coughing beside me during the investigation. In fact, it had snowed so heavily yesterday, and he was wearing a thin shirt while giving his coat to me. It was no wonder he caught a cold. But now I really had no right to care about him. I was no longer the Edna who would feel heartbroken and run out in the rain to buy him cold medicine when she saw him having a fever in the middle of the night. At most, I would remind him to drink more hot water. We've questioned all the relevant people thoroughly, inside and out. The people related to the victim have also been isolated separately. At the bar counter, Alex scratched his head with a pen. Even if it was a vendetta killing, there shouldn't be any more problems, right? Then, he looked up and saw Ethan standing beside me. Yo, if it isn't the great physicist Ethan, I have to say, I should thank you. If it weren't for your constant letdowns as a heartless guy 4 years ago, Edna might not have come with us. Staring at me won't help. Look at that look in your eyes. You're probably thinking about how to kill me, right? Let me tell you, this is a society ruled by law now. I ignored his chatter. There was something wrong with this case. But then again, which case we've handled wasn't strange in some way. None of you can escape. Judging from the message left by the suspect, the possibility of a vendetta killing was high. Now, the people related to the victim were indeed under key protection. Logically speaking, I shouldn't feel so uneasy. Unless... My train of thought was interrupted because Professor Lin walked over quickly. I had never seen him so emotionally unstable before. Evacuate now. What? Alex was also clearly taken aback. However, the next second, a huge rumble came from underground. Unless... Everyone here was related to the victim. The suspect wanted to murder the entire scientific community. 8 C4 bombs were installed in 4 different places in this building. It's impossible to evacuate so many people at once. When I realized this, I had already secretly arranged for a group of core scientists to be transferred. In the escape passage, Professor Lin briefly explained to us as we went downstairs. Then, he suddenly turned around and saw Ethan. Why are you here? It seemed that Ethan was on the list of core scientists. Professor Lin continued, the other side is a group of extremists from a religious organization. They claim that technology will destroy humanity and that human civilization should be built on faith. I suspect there's an insider, whether it's the placement of the bombs or the fact that they immediately discovered our evacuation operation. The first bomb has already exploded. Before he could finish speaking, the corridor we were in began to shake. The corridor collapsed, and a huge gap appeared between us and Alex and Professor Lin who were walking in front. Alex grabbed a relatively stable steel bar and held onto Professor Lin. Professor Lin then leaned forward and reached out his hand to me. I even admired myself for having such a tacit understanding with them in such a situation. After all, we had been to the hospital's emergency room many times over the years. I reached out my hand, and just as our hands were about to touch, the ground beneath my feet suddenly collapsed. My heart almost jumped into my throat, but the next second, I was firmly pulled back. Ethan's hand was shaking. After all, someone who usually goes in and out of a laboratory couldn't possibly have the strength to hold onto an entire person in an instant, but he still held onto me desperately. Gravel fell, and the sweat on his forehead dripped onto the back of my hand. It was burning hot. Let go. I didn't know why, but on that day, in such an urgent situation, my brain could still function so clearly. I stared at him and said word by word, "Let go. I don't want to owe you my life, Ethan." Whether I owed him my life or not was another matter, because the next second, the place he was holding onto also collapsed. The two of us fell rapidly with Alex's scream. I felt that my head was hit by some stone during the fall. Then I felt Ethan adjusting his body and protecting me in his arms. Then came the intense pain and the impact, and there was a man's muffled groan that he couldn't hold back in my ear. When I regained consciousness, it was in complete darkness. I heard Ethan's hissing sound, which proved that he was still alive, but his condition was definitely not good. I touched the ground beneath me, and it was all sticky liquid. He was underneath me. First aid knowledge was essential for us. I groped in the dark and tore off my clothes, then looked for his wounds. When I touched a certain part, he let out a muffled groan but still endured it. "Ethan, it will relieve the pain a bit if you cry out when you're in pain." But he didn't respond. The sounds coming from his throat made me clearly aware of how much it hurt. Whatever. I started to simply treat his wounds, but it was too dark, and there were gravels all around. His blood just wouldn't stop flowing out. Just when I thought he was about to pass out from the pain, my hand was grabbed. He rubbed it, seemingly looking for my hand, and then inserted his fingers into mine, interlocking them. There was slippery blood in between. I tried to pull my hand back but couldn't. "The day you left, I thought you would come back. So I waited, but I never waited for you. They said you left and went to the UK. At that time, I was thinking, the UK, it takes so many hours to get there by plane. How are you going to come back to see me? I didn't know that you were never going to come back to see me again." Later, I found out when you blocked me and deleted all my contact information, and I couldn't get through to you even when I changed more than a dozen phone numbers. I don't know how I got through that year. Every time an unknown number called, I thought it was you. I flipped through our chat records, missing you. I wondered why I used to reply to your messages so rarely. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out why I didn't kiss you when you were acting coquettish with me, why I didn't protect you when you were wronged. These were such simple things, so why couldn't I do them? I applied to go to the UK, but I couldn't find you, and there was no information about you at all. Why is the world so big? I could find you whenever I wanted before. Later, I realized that you didn't want me to find you. I know that it's best not to disturb you. You don't want me anymore. But now that you're right in front of me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. In the end, all I heard were his endless apologies. There was some movement outside. It seemed that the rescue workers were shouting. I quickly called for help. A few faint rays of light shone over. I felt something was wrong and looked at his eyes. His eyes were unfocused, and his eyes were filled with boundless red. Ethan had gone blind. He also had 2 or 3 broken ribs. A steel bar almost pierced through the back of his head, just a few centimeters away. The doctor said that the blindness was temporary, but how long it would take to recover and how well he would recover depended on his own efforts. But at least for now, he couldn't see anything at all. I stood by his hospital bed. The sky outside was getting dark, and the sunset was a bit cruel. A thin layer of red light fell on him. I thought for a moment and said, "Ethan, I'm really grateful to you. If it weren't for you, I might have lost an arm or a leg. But you know, there's a term called moral kidnapping. Just because you saved me doesn't mean I'll marry you in return, and it doesn't mean I'll start over with you. None of that will happen. I can pay you double the medical expenses and hire a nurse for you. If you need me to take care of you, that's okay too, and I'll do my best. But when you recover and are discharged from the hospital, it's over between us. Got it?" For a long time, the man on the bed didn't respond. I sighed. "Think about it carefully. I'm leaving now." But then I saw him suddenly raise his hand and grab at the air, as if he was trying to catch something that didn't exist. "Don't go. Stay with me, please." I didn't know if it was appropriate to describe Ethan now as obedient. He would eat whatever food was given to him and was willing to cooperate with any treatment. I heard that the medicine for treating his eyes was very painful, but he never made a sound. The nurse said that it was only when I was there that he wouldn't groan. Ethan's request was for me to stay with him. After all, he went blind because of me, and he just wanted me to be with him, doing nothing. I couldn't refuse such a simple request. I didn't want to owe him any more favors either. When Ethan fell asleep, I didn't stay with him anymore and planned to go outside to wash an apple. When I went out, I met his attending doctor. "Are you Ethan's girlfriend?" Thanks to Ethan these days, my German had improved enough for me to communicate with them. "No." I shook my head. Don't quarrel with the patient anymore. The patient's emotions are unstable, and shedding tears is not conducive to the healing of the wound. Tears? I was taken aback. I'm not his girlfriend, but he saved me. If my presence will delay his recovery, I'll leave now. That's all I could do about this matter. When I went back to the ward, the man was sitting up in the hospital bed. There was a bandage over his eyes, but it seemed that he had woken up. He probably heard everything. So I didn't bother to pretend anymore. You heard the conversation just now, right? If you keep this up, I can't stay with you. I hope your eyes get better soon so that we can break off completely. After a long while, his Adam's apple moved. He said in a voice so soft that it seemed it could be crushed by the wind, I won't cry anymore. Don't leave. I stopped and looked at him. Ethan, when you ignored me in the past, I used to cry secretly like this too. I still couldn't stay there. I turned around and walked out of the ward. I decided not to stay with Ethan for the time being. Coincidentally, Professor Lin and the others were short of hands. These two only had some minor injuries. When I walked to the door of Professor Lin's office, an ashtray narrowly missed my foot. I shrugged. I had seen this kind of scene many times. They would have such outbursts every once in a while. I'm your brother. Professor Lin's furious voice came from inside. So what if you're my brother? Brothers are born to be. I guessed that this time, the ashtray actually hit. Alex came out of the office with his hand on his head, and a streak of blood ran down half of his face. I didn't dare to go in while standing outside, but the person holding his forehead still had the mood to be playful. Yo, Edna, don't go in now. My brother is really angry. I could tell just by looking at the blood on your head. He sat beside me and casually treated his wound. How are things between you and Ethan? The way he looked at me that day, he wanted to kill me. Given our relationship, you can't let him off easily. I sighed. Ethan was like a big problem in my heart. Whether it was 4 years ago or 4 years later, he was a knot in my heart that I couldn't untie. I don't know. I'll stay away from him if I can. Sigh. I tilted my head back and thought aimlessly. Until the phone in my pocket vibrated, as if it was going to take my life. I answered it, and it was a call from the hospital. Edna, could you come back? The patient is very agitated without seeing you. Please help to soothe him. So when I saw Ethan again, his collar was messy, the needle had fallen out, he was blind, and he was being held back while shouting my name. Where's Edna? Edna is gone. I want to see Edna. Edna, what are you yelling about? I stood there and talked to him, and he suddenly stopped. He raised his hand to straighten his collar and then his hair. This guy still has an image to maintain. I'm here. I stood there and said, watching him stumble towards me. He finally touched me and then pulled me into his arms. He smelled of disinfectant now, with a faint smell of blood. Ethan, do you think you're really affectionate? If you're so affectionate, why didn't you show it when I came to you again and again? If you're so affectionate, why didn't you care when I was wronged? Where the hell were you then? Over the years, I've told myself again and again that it's okay to cry once and it's okay to scold him once. But I'm still sad, as if my heart is being squeezed tightly, and my whole body hurts. Isn't it too late to turn back now? In the silence of the night, I asked him. But he kept shaking, holding me tightly and trembling. I didn't know if it was blood or something else seeping through the bandage and dripping down. I thought that the doctor's advice was in vain. That night was like a violent storm. After that, Ethan adjusted himself. I don't know how to describe this subtle change. Before, there was always a cloud of gloom around him, but now there is a bit of hope. This is a good thing because the doctor said that his recovery speed has increased. The faster he recovers, the sooner I can leave. I still spared no effort in making sure he got better. I never thought that one day I would master a skill, which was how to feed a blind person. Most of the time, he and I were quite silent. He wasn't a talkative person, and I didn't want to talk to him. The day his bandage was removed from his eyes was also the day I was leaving. He told the doctor that he could see, and the doctor said it was great. I stood by his bed and said to him, my visa is about to expire, so I have to leave first. He sat there in a daze for a long time. Then, he asked me softly, when are you leaving? This afternoon. Please don't leave without saying goodbye again, okay? I'm telling you now, aren't I? Then there was silence again. I stared at his hands. He was unconsciously clenching the bedsheet, then letting go, and repeating the action. Then he smiled and asked me, will I never see you again? Are we in a relationship where we have to see each other? I interrupted him. In fact, Ethan used to say this kind of sentence to me often. Edna, do you really have to ask me to stay with you? Edna, can't you finish such a simple thing? Edna, is this thing really worth crying about? Now that I can say this sentence smoothly, I don't know if it's thanks to Ethan. He listened to me and then stared blankly, lost in thought. He had been like this often these days. I could never figure out what was going on in his head. I turned around and left. He asked me from behind, "Can you give me your contact information?" I didn't answer and closed the door of the ward. I remembered when I added him on WhatsApp. I sent him more than a dozen friend requests. At that time, he probably couldn't have imagined that one day, he would want to add back the girl he had rejected more than a dozen times. I took a plane back to the UK alone. It was a small passenger plane, and it was a bit bumpy on the way back. I rested my chin on my hand and looked at the flowing clouds outside the window, but I felt that the past month was like a chaotic dream. How could I not be affected when I saw Ethan again? After all, he was the person I had truly loved with all my heart when I was young. It was like forcefully tearing open the scab that had finally formed. Anger, loneliness, and sadness were like a thick layer of dark clouds brewing, but I didn't cry as easily as before. I just endured it and then tried to digest it. I thought that since he was in Germany and I was in the UK, thousands of kilometers apart, I probably wouldn't see him again in my life. However, 3 months after I returned to my residence in the UK, a person from my hometown moved in next door. That person was Ethan. What a coincidence. Your school invited me to give a lecture. I didn't expect the rented house to be so close to yours. A bouquet of roses was handed to me. The flowers were fresh, but I took them and threw them directly into the trash can on my left. I walked past him, got in my car, and went to school. In the following days, things were like this between him and me. I could see him when I went to work in the morning and when I came home from work. Whether I left at 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, and whether it was windy or rainy, I could always see the man in a long trench coat. Sometimes he brought me flowers, and sometimes he brought me food. I fed them all to the trash can without exception. We were like we were competing with each other, until one day, I really couldn't stand it anymore. I was afraid that if I threw away any more, I would be reported for extreme waste. Ethan, have you had enough? I stood in front of my house, with my hands in my pockets, looking at him. He weighed the dumplings in his hand. I've tried them. The taste of this restaurant is quite authentic. You haven't eaten all day after sorting out the case files. Remember to eat. I took a deep breath. Go out of this door, turn left, and walk 700 meters. There's a whole street of restaurants. I'll go out and eat when I'm hungry. Got it? He stood there, stunned, holding the dumplings in his hand, not knowing whether to hold them up or put them down. In fact, I knew about the dumplings in his hand. That restaurant was really famous, and it was quite far from here, and it would take at least an hour to queue up. But so what? Even if you care about me and take care of me, I don't want to go back to the past. I opened the door with my key and then slammed it shut. Also, you're really annoying now. Actually, I was going to find the landlord to change the house. But since that day, Ethan never bothered me again. Sometimes, there would still be a bouquet of flowers at my doorstep. When I coughed while giving a lecture at school, there would be medicine placed on the stairs outside the door, but I never saw him again. I guessed that he probably realized that he was annoying. There was a big gap between Ethan's major and mine, so we basically didn't see each other at school. This was a good thing. I didn't have to worry about how to avoid him, but sometimes, I still inevitably heard his name in the discussions of my classmates. This was normal. Ethan had grown up like this. A genius was naturally eye-catching. What's more, he was a genius who was almost perfect in appearance and other aspects. Even his slightly flawed personality could be considered an added bonus, like an unattainable person. This year, Professor Lin surprisingly recruited a new student. He never aimed to have students all over the world, and the number of students who caught his eye over the years was extremely small. Just as I was wondering if another talented young person had emerged, he took a sip of the tea in front of him. This student has a powerful background and was forced on me. You take care of this student. In other words, this mess is for you, and don't come to me. Actually, I wasn't opposed to taking on this mess. If I wanted to be promoted to an associate professor, I really needed this last step. But when I saw who my new junior female classmate was, I felt terrible. It was Anna. First Ethan, and now Anna. The past bad relationships all came back to haunt me, making me suspect that this year, my luck has hit rock bottom. Switching from physics to psychology, it's hard not to suspect that she couldn't continue with physics. However, I didn't expect that Anna would become a rather popular internet celebrity in China. Relying on her outstanding appearance and the background of the Department of Physics at Stanford University, she established a strong female protagonist persona that is inspirational, intelligent, highly educated, and willing to share her daily life with netizens. In the videos, she is confident, cheerful, and generous. After completing her physics courses at Stanford University, she actually chose to switch majors to psychology and continued her studies in the UK. I heard that millions of people watch her daily life-sharing videos every day, and I also, accidentally, appeared in her videos and became her vicious senior sister. Here's what happened. In fact, I don't think her English is even good enough to pass the IELTS with a score of 6.5. Her thesis was full of grammar errors. Professor Lin said, "No good," and I just relayed the meaning of "no good" to her. As a result, the next night, she posted a video on a social platform. The video, her eyes were red, as if she had just cried. She took a deep breath and said softly, "It's 1:30 in the morning in London, UK. I've been thinking for a long time, but I can't fall asleep. Everyone says how glorious the study abroad life is. In fact, it's not like that at all. Maybe I'm just unlucky." Sigh. A senior sister who often made things difficult for me during my undergraduate years has become my senior sister again. Everyone knows that this senior sister doesn't have very good character. My grandfather was a very famous physicist, and his friend once gave him a fountain pen, which he left to me. Maybe this senior sister was just jealous of me having that pen. Once she came to the laboratory and secretly took the pen away. Later, the matter became a big deal, and even the police came. Then my senior sister secretly put the pen back in the middle of the night when no one was around and then accused me of framing her. How could I frame her? What would I gain from framing her? I just wanted to get my pen back, but I didn't expect to be outsmarted by her cleverness. This matter had a great impact on me. I even suffered from depression for a while, and it's only been in recent years that I've gotten better. It's also because of posting vlogs and having you, my dear followers, always encouraging me that I was able to get out of it. But now I've met her again, and I am really breaking down. I don't know what to do. A few days ago, she blocked my thesis, wouldn't let me submit it, and wouldn't let me communicate with the tutor. In fact, over the years, I don't know if it's because she's been abroad for too long, but she's really changed. Her words and deeds are full of a sense of superiority, as if she looks down on me just because I'm from my home country. But isn't she also from this country? How can she forget her roots? I guess even she didn't expect that after this video was posted, the traffic would suddenly explode in an unexpected way. The combination of themes like being in a foreign country, studying abroad, exclusion, and bullying suddenly became a huge hit. The first day I was still complaining to Professor Lin that Anna really wasn't suitable to be under my guidance. The next day, my email was filled with insulting messages. I was doxxed. Words like bitch and whore could be seen everywhere at a glance. Of course, there were even more insulting words that were not even suitable to be said openly. My phone was directly called so many times that it was shut down, and my address was also dug up. The comment section of the social platform was full of abuse. Some people even rushed to the official account of our school. The influence of an internet celebrity with millions of followers, combined with a controversial topic, caused this video to be widely discussed and spread in China. Then various accounts took the lead in criticizing me. In the internet age, it's too easy to punish someone just by typing on the keyboard. This kind of person deserves to die. I hope she drops dead on the streets of the UK. I've already come to her school, and I'm going to take the lead in the charge. They can win a lot of applause. Everyone regards themselves as justice, holding a sword and vowing to execute the evil person in their hearts. Then, some international students at our school who had watched the video started to attack me. When I got off work, I found that my car tires had been punctured. I squatted in front of the car, touching the outline that had been pierced by glass. Alex came to me. "Let me take you home." I nodded. "Don't look at your phone or other things for now." What kind of thing is this? Are those people brainless? Don't they have any judgment of their own? On the way, I rested my chin on my hand and watched the cars passing by like flowing lights outside the window. When I got home, I saw someone I hadn't seen for a long time. It was Ethan. When he saw me get out of the car, he ran over a bit nervously, wanting to reach out and hold my hand, but he suddenly stopped and just watched me enter my house. After taking a shower at night, I looked down from upstairs. The figure of the man was standing under the street lamp. The shadows of the trees were rustling, and he just stood there like an unshakable monument. I didn't know how long he would stand there. The next day, Ethan got into a fight with one of his students. The cause was that the student couldn't answer his question in class. He asked the student what he was really doing. Just then, he caught a glimpse of the student preparing to edit an email to send to me. "Whore, do you give special services just because it's a British guy?" Ethan then punched the student in the head, and it ended up in the school infirmary. It was the school infirmary again. When I got there, it was almost evening. In fact, Ethan didn't have much injury at first, but the doctor said that the injury he got in Germany before hadn't been well healed, and now it had recurred. I sat beside him, looking up at the ceiling. The white lights were blinding. I didn't look at him and asked softly, "Ethan, does the truth matter?" "Important," I heard him say. But this time, my answer was, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to Anna, it doesn't matter to the vast number of netizens, and it shouldn't matter to me either." No one will care how many bowls of noodles you ate, right? Until you cut open your own stomach. They are attacking a fictional person, and that fictional person just has my name on it. Then they want me to pay the price for that fictional person. If I try to defend myself now, like, oh, I didn't do that thing, you have to believe me. Will anyone listen? No. They are just people who scroll through short videos and play on the forum. They leave a message to scold you 1 second, and who will remember you the next second? Who will care if you are innocent or not? No one will care. But you care so much. What's the use? I once took on a case. A girl was constantly cyberbullied and finally committed suicide to prove her innocence. What did her suicide bring? A year later, there were still people who thought she had done the things she didn't do. This is the era of developed networks and popular short videos, where an invisible dagger can easily end a person's life. But you know what? Even more cruel is that the people who raise the dagger never think they ever raised the dagger. I don't know why I told him these things that day. Logically, someone like me should have already seen it clearly. Maybe it's because he is Ethan. Sigh. He is Ethan. He had an IV drip in his hand. I stood up. Then why should I care? Adlerian psychology once said that life is about separating your own issues from those of others. But then I heard him say from his seat, no, it's important. It's important. I suddenly felt as if time and space had switched, and I was back in that afternoon 4 years ago. I was holding his wrist, and he frowned and asked me, why do you always ask me to believe you? Is my belief really that important? So, this was his answer. I didn't expect that Ethan, who never played on the internet, would post a long article on social media. It detailed all the details about that fountain pen during our university days, and provided evidence that with the conditions at that time, it was impossible for me to climb through the window and put the pen back. He wrote a lot. It turned out that the reason the post on the confession wall was withdrawn so quickly was that he found the responsible classmate and asked for it to be deleted. It turned out that the moment the pen was lost, he had already told the counselor that he didn't think I stole it. These were things he had never told me before. Even if he had told me, I wouldn't have thought much of it. In this article, from beginning to end, he told the story as my classmate and didn't mention our relationship again. At the same time, he indicated the school he worked for at the end of the article, as well as his academic achievements, and guaranteed in his own name that I was not the kind of person described in Anna's video at all. In fact, even when testifying, few people would guarantee with their academic status. Because even if I didn't make mistakes before, if I made mistakes later, he would also be ruined along with me. Then, Professor Lin also issued a statement, meaning that he would no longer serve as Anna's tutor, and Anna's thesis was just poorly written, and it had nothing to do with me. To my surprise, people from all walks of life who had cooperated with us over the years also stood up to testify for me. The mother of the girl who was cyberbullied to death posted the following words under Anna's social media account. The development of the internet has made the private sphere socialized. Many people always think they are still in a private space and can casually evaluate and abuse others. They don't realize the confusion between the private space and the public space. In the internet age, everyone needs to be more responsible for their public remarks. After that, the public opinion began to reverse. There were more and more scolding voices, but this time they were directed at Anna. The downfall of an internet celebrity brings even more entertainment resources. Marketing accounts rushed to expose Anna. All kinds of her past were dug up, and there were all negative comments under her previous videos. I suddenly sadly found that the mother's words had no effect at all. Everyone was celebrating, looking for exciting points. As for who they were celebrating for and whose body was rotting, it didn't matter at all. Later, Anna recorded her last video and jumped off the English channel. Some people said she was saved, and some people said she wasn't. My life went on as usual. I heard that Ethan's visit was coming to an end, and this was definitely something to celebrate. I almost wrote, "Hurry up and get back to your Germany," on my face. As a result, he followed me and told me, "I've decided to stay at your school as a research scholar." I squinted my eyes and smiled at him, not very brightly. "Oh, is that so? What a pity. My tutor is going to be rehired in China, and I guess I'll go back with him." He was stunned for a moment, looked at me, and was a bit helpless. It was the end of the year again, and the streets were lit up with brilliant lights. I heard that there was a fireworks show not far from our street. When I got home, I just saw the sky in the distance blooming with bright flowers. I didn't let him touch me, and he never touched me again. He nodded his chin, indicating that I should open my palm. A small necklace was swinging in the air. It was in the shape of a heart, and it seemed that there should be another one to match it. It was the necklace that I had thrown into the artificial lake at school, and now it was in front of me again. The colorful light fell on his eyebrows and eyes, and the sound of the fireworks in the distance scattered into the noise. "Edna, the necklace wasn't lost. Can we ignore what the fortune teller said? I stared at him, snatched the necklace, and then reached out. This time, the silver necklace fell into the vast night sky and could never be found again. No. Happy New Year, Ethan. He nodded and stood beside me, exhaling. The white mist was floating, and the sound of fireworks filled the air, but it couldn't hide the redness that quietly appeared in his eyes.